from KPFA and Pacifica Radio, a special live multimedia interactive flashpoint election crimes bulletin, Jim Crow in the mailbox, blocking voters of color. I'm Dennis Bernstein with Greg Palast, and welcome to this special edition of Flashpoints with Greg Palast. This is a broadcast that has to do everything to do with how to stop the theft of this election, and a special welcome to those who are going to join us on Facebook Live. This is our maiden voyage, and we are happy to be here with you. Please take this moment to share. Hit that share button right now. Make sure you share us with the world. We'd love to hear you. Meanwhile, let me tell you about what's happening today. Tonight we have two very special guests along with our good friend Greg Palast. Reverend Lennox Yearwood, he's the founder and president of the Hip Hop Caucus. He's a public advocate, the legend, and also with the public advocate and legendary Ralph Nader. Again, I'm Dennis Bernstein with Greg Palast, and this is a special edition of the Flashpoints Election Crimes Bulletin, which we have been doing to protect your vote since 2016. Greg, welcome, and in one moment we're going to bring in the good Reverend. How are you doing today? Indeed, I can hear you. I hope the world can hear you. All right. Well, Greg, let's talk a little bit about what we're here for, and let's welcome back into the broadcast Reverend Lennox Yearwood. Reverend, you're a legend in my name, and the work you've been doing fighting for the vote over all these many years has been crucial. I want to get your first hit. We're watching a sort of a frontal steal of the election process. We've got a new postal master who has decided to collect the mailboxes and the tallying machines. Your thoughts of what we're seeing now?
Well, it's good to see you as well, and Greg, and talk with you. This moment is a moment when we're seeing what happens usually to Black and Indigenous people of color, but it's happening to everybody. Normally, Black people have been put in a position of being used with voter suppression in a way that they can discount their votes, and that happens with people of color and Indigenous communities as well. This year, what we're seeing is that unfortunately a lot of our white brothers and sisters have now joined the charade of trying to count how many bubbles are in a soap bar, or how many marbles are in a jar. We're now seeing literally the entire country being tossed into a place where their votes will not matter. And so I think that people are outraged. They're not used to feeling this way when polling places are being moved, mailboxes are being thrown away. They're not used to being in a situation when they're told that police officers will be standing guard to intimidate them, so that those who are returning citizens, aka ex-felons, can be in a position. So now, this is the time when you now see a lot more people are alarmed by what's going on, because they are now feeling what it feels like to be disenfranchised. And when they don't like it. We didn't like it as Black people or brown people. We don't like it, but we've seen it for literally 50 to 100 years. But now a lot of our folks in the movement are now seeing what it feels like to be disenfranchised.
There's some concern, Reverend, that Trump isn't going to give it up easy, and that we're going to see a second, more violent battle after the votes are cast. Are you concerned that this could go to even a more ugly place?
Most definitely. We have a situation here where capitalism is, and our economy and our entire structure of democracy is on the line. And there are those who would rather be on a suicidal mission for democracy and just literally themselves than literally have this country continue. They are worried that their positions of how they've made so much money on the issues of climate change and on the extractive measures of the fossil fuel industry. They're worried that their ideas of what it means to have black and brown people used to populate their private prisons. They're worried that the food that they can just give to people that could be just deregulated. And what could happen? They realize that a lot of people are waking up, and they understand that if it changes now, that not only just Republicans but also Democrats are realizing that the status quo is changing. And so this is a historic moment. So I think that they're going to do everything they can. And unfortunately, Dennis, that even means they may kill for it. If it comes down to that, they will do everything. I mean, let that sink in. They will do everything they can to hold on to power.
You are listening to a special edition of the Flashpoint Election Crimes Bulletin. My name is Dennis Bernstein, and also joining us is Greg Palast. He's got an important new book, How Trump Stole 2020. Now, it's really a book about how to try and prevent Trump from stealing 2020. Let me bring you into the dialogue, Greg. Join us. That's where I'd love to pick it up, Greg, and I bring the Rev back into the discussion. We have seen, Reverend Ura, the Democrats have been light and timid about fighting for that vote. We saw Gore give it up in 2000. They didn't fight the battle. Your thoughts on how to stiffen up and strengthen the courage of the Democrats who aren't yet ready for this fight if today's hearings with the postmaster are any witness, because this guy essentially said, I'm not changing nothing, I'm not putting back those machines, and all the Democrats and the Republicans, well, they accepted it, but the Dems didn't have much to say about it. Said, oh, thank you, so you're not going to do any more. Your thoughts on that? Giving up the vote so easily.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the things that Greg just said, I think it's so important, is that we're not hearing the argument and what's being laid out and the reality. We're somehow, I think that Democrats, or those again who want to just believe in this administration's better side, they're not taking seriously what they see before them. Every single breadcrumb that is being laid out by this administration has led us to show that I would be surprised actually if they don't do everything to steal this election. I mean, they've said, in other words, they've done everything. They bought the mask, they bought the gun, they got the note for the bank. They've done everything. They've gone into the bank. I would assume they're going to be a bank robber. But I would assume that the last thing they're going to do is actually go to walk out the bank or put money into the bank. They've done everything that looks like, sounds like, acts like someone who is going to steal this election. They look like it's like they're about to do in democracy. And so I'm surprised that in this convention that we just saw, that's not that wasn't front and center. I think, President Obama had a little bit of his speech was kind of somewhere in line. I mean, there were bits and pieces of his conversation where he was warning about that. And I mean, people were saying that's dark Obama, but that was where we need to be. It seems like too many times Democrats are playing checkers while their adversary on the other side is playing chess. And it just seems like they're a step behind, as though they're waiting for something to happen, then to react. I just want to say this about Roger Stone, for example. Roger Stone, as Greg mentioned, was someone who received 7 federal counts and received, literally, to show you if no jail time, very, very little jail time, and what was put forth. And for many people of color, when we see that, as an example, we see Roger Stone walking away. But on the other hand, we see people like Khalif Browder in New York, who literally couldn't afford bail money, was accused of stealing a backpack, and in his situation was in jail for 3 years in Rikers. When he came out, was so damaged he committed suicide. And so you have a situation here where people will see on and on and on 2 types of justice, and they're now seeing 2 types of democracy. I really want to repeat again that this democracy that we are seeing now in 2020 is the exact same democracy that Black people saw in 1955. It's the exact same voter suppression that we saw in 1920. We saw that. So what we're seeing now is something that we're used to.
You are listening to a special edition of the Election Crimes Bulletin on Flashpoints. I'm Dennis Bernstein with Greg Palast. This is also live on Facebook. Hit the click, join us there, tell your friends, share this broadcast. This show, the Election Crimes Bulletin, was begun in 2016 with Greg Palast, fighting for the vote. Then we continue the work here in 2020. Greg has a brand new book, which is incredibly important, How Trump Stole 2020, and we are sharing this with you. Later on in the broadcast, we'll also be joined by Ralph Nader. We don't want you to miss that as well. And then there'll be a little afterlife on Facebook Live for those of you who want to interact directly with Greg. But Reverend, what does the dialogue have to be now? We've seen a lot of people in the streets. There are a lot of people who are motivated. A lot more. It seems to be a lot more people know what the situation is in terms of the way black and brown people have been slaughtered for so many years. But how do you channel that? How do you put that into practice in the face of what we know is coming right at us? We're standing on tracks and it's coming right at us like a train.
Yeah. So for those who are listening, I am the president of the Hip Hop Caucus. That is an organization that works with young people across this country, predominantly 18 to 35. I'm still around. I can say that I have fun being with the young people. They check my health care every day, make sure I'm up to date, you know, and make sure I'm good to go. But it's an awesome organization that's not just, it's predominantly black and indigenous people of color. It also has white, it's male, it's female, straight, gay, theist, atheist. It's an amazing organization that uses one's cultural expression to shape one's political experience. And so in that, what they have seen for them is they've seen two sides of America. They've seen, most of them when they were growing up, Barack Obama, and now they see Donald Trump. It's important that they, as young people, were not afraid to challenge President Obama when it came to the issue of climate change. They were willing to be arrested during the Keystone XL pipeline. They were willing to stand up in Standing Rock. They were also willing to fight when Eric Garner or Michael Brown or Sandra Bland. And so they were willing to make their voices heard then. And so I think that now what you're asking is that how do we then take that? What's important is that they were not afraid to stand up for what was right, even though those who were in power were supposed to be on their side. It's easier now to some degree because it's probably more black and white. The next step, though, Dennis, is this. Our job is to help that generation to understand the importance of policy and legislation. That is the missing link. A lot of them don't see that connection. And what we're trying to tell them is that demonstration without legislation leads to frustration. And so we're trying to get them to understand that this electoral part of this process is as important as the protest part of what they're doing in the streets.
All right, let's bring Greg Palast back into this discussion because his book is all about the fight to protect your vote and how to fight this on many levels. So, Greg, maybe you want to give us a bit of a rundown in terms of the election protection kit.
Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin, who was told, you can't vote here anymore.
You need it. You have to have it.
Sorry. Sorry, there was some glitch here. Anyway, his 92-year-old cousin, Martin Luther King, had been voting at the same voting station for 50 years. They threw her out. They said, you're no longer registered here. So if they can take away Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin, they could throw her out of the voting station. They can get rid of you too. Understand 16.7 million people have lost their vote. Now, here's the other problem. If they've purged you, you ain't getting no mail-in ballot. It's real simple. If the ballot hasn't been mailed out to you, you can't mail it back in. That's pretty clear. Now, here's the other problem. See, for the first time, as the Reverend said, white people are finding out that it's difficult to vote by mail. This has been happening in the African American community in communities of color for years. Do you know that the post office loses up to 20% of all mass mailings into urban areas and big apartment buildings? So, again, we don't have a functioning post office for people of color in urban areas and low-income areas. This didn't just start now. It's just that finally they're taking away the mailboxes and the postal sorting centers, which affect the suburban areas. So welcome white people to voting like a black person. They're not going to make it easy for you. It's an obstacle course. So you better, number one, is ask for your mail-in vote at least 2 months early. If it's not there for within 3 weeks of the election, here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to go into the county board of elections and pick up your ballot. I know that's not easy. I know it's not wonderfully safe. Bring gloves and masks, etc. But that's what you got to do. You're going to have to save your vote. I just looked at, in Wisconsin, in the Democratic primary, 23,000 mail-in ballots were disqualified in the Democratic primary. In the general, we can expect at that rate about 70,000 ballots to be disqualified for all kinds of cockamamie reasons. Like in Wisconsin, you have to have a witness signature. If you're a student, forget about, you're going to have to send in, by the way, a photocopy of your ID, but if you're a student, you can't send in that University of Wisconsin ID. You have to have a special ID. 50,000 African Americans in Milwaukee were disenfranchised by the law requiring you to include your photo ID in with your mail-in ballot, because 50,000 African Americans in the Milwaukee area don't have driver's licenses. Why should they? They don't have cars. They live in apartment buildings. They use public transport. But what's happening is that the disqualification of votes, when it was just happening in Milwaukee, which happened in 2016, no one cared because it was African Americans. Now it's you. So let me tell you something. Once again, 23,000 votes were disqualified in the Democratic primary in Wisconsin because of all kinds of cockamamie reasons, from not having your ID included, not having witness signature. Many states require witness signatures. Check your rules. But what's happening is, understand, 23,000 votes is bigger than Donald Trump's margin of victory in 2016. They know they can't win Wisconsin if they let the voters vote. So they're taking the tricks of 2016 and they're amplifying them. In fact, today, as we speak, the Republican Party has gone to court to demand the removal of 153,000 voters from the voter rolls of Wisconsin. That's 7 times Trump's victory margin in Wisconsin. They are really intent on putting their thumb on the scale. And let me tell you that the number of people, that if you are African American, according to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission that analyzed this, the chance your ballot will be challenged and rejected is 900% higher if you're black than if you're white. And that's the reality. We have Jim Crow with a bullet this year, and it may be with actual bullets on Election Day.
And thank you, Greg Palast. And you mentioned Wisconsin, Madison. We've seen how the politicians, the right-wing politicians there, are willing to force people into the streets after they've disappeared the polling places. We now know, because they forced people into the streets and they made it very difficult to vote, dozens of people got sick. Several died from trying to express their right to vote. So I'm concerned. I'm somebody who's over 70, and I know some of the struggles that are going on, and we know that to date, older people tend to vote more than younger people. So this process has definitely put the older generation at stake. They have risked our lives to force this kind of, to undermine this kind of policy. Before we let you go, Reverend, you want to talk about some final thoughts about where you're going to go from here, what you're looking for, what your plans are?
Yeah, I just wanted to, echo something that Greg mentioned. Just wanted to say some of the numbers. In the last election, just 3% of whites said that they were told that they weren't eligible for the election. That was compared to 9% and of Black and 9% of Hispanic respondents who indicated that during the election that someone, them or in their household, would totally lack the proper identification to vote. 10% of Black respondents and 11% of Hispanic respondents reported that they were incorrectly told they weren't listed on voter rolls, as opposed to 5% of white respondents. So we're seeing this over and over again, that there is an attack on Black, on his Latinx and indigenous people of color voting. And this is very serious. And I'll say this to you, Dennis. I want to say this, at Hip Hop Caucus, we have our Respect My Vote campaign, and you can go there. But let me say this to be very clear. We are tired of being disenfranchised. We are dying. We are dying. We're dying. This next week represents 15 years of Hurricane Katrina. We're dying. We're dying in the streets with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. We're dying. We're dying in the prisons. We're dying in alarming rates because of COVID. We're dying. Our mothers are dying. Our fathers are dying. Our grandparents are dying. And you have the audacity for the one thing that we can correct that madness is for us to vote, for us to cast our ballot, to make our lives a little better. And even in that, you want to stand in front of us and take that away. That can't happen anymore. We have got to fight like we have to fight like our lives depend on it, because we're dying. And so, Dennis, I thank you so much for having me. But know this, we're at a point now where this is our lunch counter moment for the 21st century. And we got to stand up and make sure that whatever comes, hell or high water, we're going to vote. And we're going to vote, and we're going to vote to make sure that our voice is heard. So thank you so much. Good to see you, Dennis. Good to see you, Greg. And just know that Hip Hop Caucus, we're going to fight. We got no other choice but to fight, because we're dying.
Well, I want to thank you. We are grateful that you could join us today, Reverend Lennox Yearwood, founder and president of the Hip Hop Caucus. Extraordinary group. Please check them out. What's the best way to check it out?
Just go to hiphopcaucus.org, or for the voting, go to respectmyvote.com.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We hope we can continue this dialogue.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Power to the people and to the voters. You
Most
are
definitely.
listening to a special edition of the Election Crimes Bulletin, Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. My name is Dennis Bernstein. I'm here with Greg Palast. He's got a brand new vote, which is really an election protection manual, how Trump stole 2020. He didn't do it yet, and the battle is on. I want to tell you that we're going to continue this dialogue. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to be joined by the legendary Ralph Nader, who has a lot to say about protecting your vote. So, short break. We'll be right back. All right, we are back. Dennis Bernstein here with Greg Palast. We want to tell you this is a simulcast. This is our first interactive Flashpoints election protection bulletin with the inspiration of Greg Palast, who said I could do it. I didn't think I could. But Greg is there dealing on the other side. Whatever we have to do to get this on, I want to tell you that his book is important. It is an important book in this struggle to protect the vote. We got to work on a lot of different levels, Greg, don't we? Before we bring Ralph in, this is a multi-level battle, if you will.
Well, what I would like to do is make sure that people who are listening in hit their share button. If you're on Facebook, if you want to see us, if you're listening on radio, you can go to Greg Palast Investigates, one of the hosts of the of this Facebook Live simulcast. So you can actually take a look at my hat, so you'll know for sure that I'm an investigative reporter, because I've got that fedora, But most important, I want you to hit the share button, because I want you to bring in people who normally don't get Flashpoints and the Election Crimes Bulletin. Let all your friends know. Let all your friends on Facebook know. Hit that share button. Let's get the word out. This is important. This is life or death. This is a meeting We're having a national virtual meeting right now on how to steal back this election, bust the burglary. It's really important. And, once again, we were just with the great Reverend Yearwood, head of the Hip Hop Caucus. And, I want to emphasize again, I just was looking at a study by MIT, another study, which said whose absentee ballot is not counted. Well, if you're Hispanic, the chance your absentee ballot will be challenged and rejected is 300% higher than if you're white. If you're black, 250%. And interestingly, the most vulnerable group of all are Asian Americans. They're the ones who have their ballots challenged more than anyone, more than 300% more often than white folk. Understand, when you mail in your ballot, now we have to mail in your ballot. I'm not against mailing in your ballot, but you have to understand how risky it is, because some schmuck in a Hawaiian shirt can say, I don't like that signature. We had 141,000 ballots in 2016 that were mailed in that were not counted because someone challenged those ballots, challenged the signature. Over 100,000 people lost their vote because of postage due. And then literally a couple million people lost their mail-in vote because it never got to them. And believe me, if you've moved even your apartment within your building, you're a student who's moved within your dorm, re-register right now, go online and protect it. Because remember, they're going to have 50,000 volunteers for Trump. People are worried that this is some type of intimidation army, but I haven't seen voters who would be intimidated. I was with African-American voters in Dayton waiting 5 hours in line. They're not going to be intimidated by these jerks. What I am concerned about is that their ballots will be challenged by these jerks. Like I said, 1 in 5 mail-in ballots is not counted. About 1 in 9 of those are challenged after they've been mailed in. And unfortunately, Dennis, the Democratic Party has already established the precedent of challenging mail-in votes. In New York, the Democratic Party in the Maloney-Patel race challenged 24,000 ballots, demanded that they not be counted for technical reasons. The main reason 12,000 votes were excluded because people mailed in their ballots as Mario Cuomo and the governor and Bill de Blasio told them to. But then once they mailed in their ballots, Cuomo and de Blasio said, gotcha, we're not going to count those ballots. They challenged them in courts because, are you ready for this? You have to have your ballot postmarked to have it counted. And in New York, they pre-stamped the mail-in ballots. The post office doesn't postmark pre-stamped mail. So literally, you send in your mail-in ballot, must be postmarked to be counted, but they don't postmark them. Finally, I will say that an honest postmaster, started postmarking some of the ballots, but those that weren't postmarked, about half of them, the courts threw out, and the victory of the Justice Democrat was overturned in favor of the party-favored Democrat, Carol Maloney. And if the Democrats are doing this, imagine what the Republicans are going to do, challenging your vote. So, am I saying don't mail in your vote? No, just make sure that you follow every single rule. Don't put a piece of tape on it. The Democrats challenged every ballot that had a piece of Scotch tape to seal the envelope. I didn't know that Scotch tape disqualified you as an American citizen, but apparently it does to the Democratic Party. But that ain't nothing compared to the challenges that are going to be mounted by the GOP. And so be very careful filling out your ballot. And if you're healthy and young, you're going to volunteer, my friends. You're going to volunteer to be a poll watcher and a watcher that stays through that night and the next day 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 when they're opening up those mail-in ballots and counting them. It's going to be at least a 2-week process. You got to be there.
All right, that's Greg Palast. I'm Dennis Bernstein, and I want to tell you that our next guest is Ralph Nader. For those of you who have been living on another planet, let me tell you a little bit about Ralph Nader. He is a legendary consumer advocate, lawyer, author. In his career as consumer advocate, he founded many organizations, including Center for Study of Responsive Law, the Public Interest Research Group, the Center for Auto Safety, Public Citizen. It goes on. Ralph Nader, it is good to have you with us. Can I get your initial response to this overt attempt to shut down the post office and undermine the vote? Are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised, but I'm surprised that in recent years, when this type of behavior came to greater visibility, that the obstruction of voting isn't a serious federal crime with monetary penalties and prison terms. You have a president who openly goes on national television and urges his henchmen at the post office to obstruct the delivery of votes and allows them to take away sorting machines, break them up, stop overtime, shortchange the post office, and set up the system where people will wonder whether if they vote 2 weeks before and they put it in the mail, it'll get to the destination in time. And people will often say, well, I'm not going to take the trouble of that. All this should be a crime. Obstructing voting is the essential constitutional level crime, period. And the Democrats, who moan and groan about Trump, have yet to make an effort in Congress to make it a serious crime with injunctive relief and all the rest of what the law can muster to stop the rogue president, so-called, in the White House, dangerous, decadent, disgusting, disgraceful Donald Trump from doing what he openly says. This is not a furtive Richard Nixon, who hid his Watergate stuff behind a shield. These people are openly saying that's what they can do. And 2 days of hearings by the House of Representatives are not enough. With the Postmaster General DeJoy up there, he'll play rope-a-dope. They'll shout and pound the desk and, say you should quit and all. But they should impeach him. That's an impeachable offense, and he is a high officer under the Constitution. They should immediately impeach him and throw it to the Republicans in the House and say, okay, defend this guy on national television before an institution has 91% support, the highest agency in the federal government in terms of popular support, 91%, which includes a lot of Republicans, especially in rural areas. That's the way Nancy Pelosi should raise this to the serious gravity. How many elections do they have to have stolen by the Republicans for them to go to the highest level of law enforcement and indictment? So that's one. The second, all the details that Greg puts in his book shows that this book, How Trump Stole 2020, is not just a book to read, it's a book to use. Because you basically, if you're not familiar with mail-in ballots, or if you haven't voted before, you got to train yourself. You got to look at the forms well before you fill them out to see what the pitfalls are. It's not anywhere near as difficult as learning how to play bridge or whatever, but you do have to spend a few minutes well before the election. And Greg has a website that can show you step by step, and I'm sure he's given it or he will give it in a few minutes. So then you get into a position where, as Dennis pointed out and the Reverend pointed out, you got to take the people who are obstructing you, the Republicans in this case, from voting personally. That's why people stood in line for 6-7 hours in the recent Wisconsin primary in Milwaukee. They were determined that the state Republican-dominated legislature and a ridiculous Supreme Court decision was not going to block them from voting. So there's a determination I've never seen before among a lot of voters saying, you dare obstruct me from voting? I'll show you. You're not going to discourage me. You're not going to wait me out. I'm going to vote. I'm either going to vote in person or I'm going to vote absentee or by mail ballot. And then what we should do is ask some of these mega billionaires, like Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, that's very critical of Trump. He's increased his wealth by $47 billion since March 1. Just imagine, 6 months or so, okay? And he's up to 189 billion already. You ask 3 or 4 of these guys who are undertaxed and not being required to make any sacrifice to pay for these ballot boxes all over the neighborhoods so people can put them in these secure boxes and people can collect them and take them to the election precincts. That's another way to do it. But even more is Mitch McConnell, Moscow Mitch, they're call him, because he obstructs election security legislation from domestic and foreign interference. That's why they call him Moscow Mitch. He hates it, but it fits. He's blocking a $4 billion funding of the states, which the House of Representatives has already passed, to pay for improved election security and procedures, counting, and all the rest. And that's chump change for people like Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Cook of Apple and Jeff Bezos and the head of Google and the head of Microsoft, etc. So we ought to make a demand that, hey, you guys are going down the polls. People think you're greedy, avoid taxes, you're monopolies, you guys, you exploit Chinese workers like crazy building iPhones. Look patriotic. People will think you're making a patriotic move here, and just pay in. Actually, they can pay $4 billion to state governments and get a deduction, a tax deduction. And it's perfectly legal for the state governments to take private money for these purposes, as long as they're for public purposes without any strings attached. But the real solution, my friends, to get rid of all these spiderweb, trapdoor, complex obstructions of the simple act of voting is to make voting a legal duty. At Australia, voting is a civic duty by law. You have to vote. You can get out of it if you happen to be abroad or you happen to be sick. But they come in at 96% turnout. No politicians have to spend any money begging people to turn out and vote. 96, 97% turnout. And we're lucky if we get 63% turnout in a presidential race, and it's much less in a congressional off-year race. So let's keep the big solution in mind here. And as long as people can write in their vote for the candidates of their choice, or vote for binding none of the above, that takes care of the civil liberties problem. In America right now, you cannot go and vote no to everybody. You have to vote yes to somebody. And that's not right. You need the right to register a no confidence vote. And I'll bet you that'll come in 85% support. I know none of the above comes in at 90% support. So that's the overall future reform. In the meantime, check out Greg Palast's websites and ask the Democratic National Committee and the various Democratic committees at the state level why they don't get a book like this, which has good cartoons and graphics by Ted Rall, and that's comic relief that's important in the middle of the book. Why they don't buy it in bulk? Seven Stories Press told me that
Ralph,
if you buy two...
I wanted to jump in. 200 suggestion. Bezos, didn't he say something like he's going to give away half his wealth in the next 20 years or something like that? How much would it cost for him to buy a book for everybody over 18? That's not a bad idea, right?
You're right, and he knows how to deliver it, doesn't he? They know how to deliver books, don't they?
Quickly.
It's I think that Seven Stories Press, anyone who orders 250 copies or more of this paperback can get a discount down to $5 a book plus shipping, which is pretty good. So if you got a circle, if you're a member of a service club, if you're a member of a political club, if you're a member of Indivisible or Our Revolution or Move On, whatever, this is the book to have.
That's Ralph Nader. He's the guest to have. My name is Dennis Bernstein. I'm with Greg Palast. This is a special interactive edition of our Flashpoints Election Crimes Bulletin, which we've been doing since 2016, really back to 2000, when I began to work with Greg, when he called the shots on the stealing of the 2000 election. And I want to give Greg a chance to ask you a question, Ralph.
Okay, by the way, thank you for that big up on the book, How Trump Stole 2020. And yes, we'll have at gregpalast.com the purge list, which we have blasted out with our lawyers from these GOP states like Ohio and Georgia. You can see if you've been purged from the voter rolls, and then you can re-register. Very important. And I want to ask Ralph a very difficult question. Given Roger Stone out of prison and on the loose, and the Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys, what happens when they use violence to stop the vote count? What should be the reaction? What do we do to prepare for it? What do we do to react for it if they use violence to stop the vote count?
Well, there are a lot of tools. One, you got to alert the FBI here. You got to alert the local versions of the FBI and the attorney generals. You got to put them on notice that this may happen. You got to go to the courts and get injunctions, which are enforceable by the decrees. And you can try to anticipate it, Greg, by having people at the polls. Sojourners, Jim Wallace told me weeks ago that they are going into the swing states. They're having a lawyer and a clergy person at as many precincts to deal with the intimidation. But you got to learn from Florida in the year 2000. The party that has the most energy and the most brazenness wins, and the Democrats didn't have it. The Republicans had it. So you got to do that. And as you know, Greg, there are a lot of good groups on the ground fighting the fight that you want to see to get people able to vote, willing to vote, filling out the forms right, learning how to avoid things like voter purges, coming back. There are a lot of, it's not just the ACLU, there are lawyer groups, there are other groups all over the country. You need to find out the names. I'm sure you've got those names on your website, yes, which you give 5 times clearly, Greg.
Yes, okay, this is Greg Palast. Again, at gregpalast.com, we'll have a lot of the rules for each of the states or places where you can go to get the rules, because voting by mail ain't so easy unless you're on the West Coast. In 8 states, you're going to have a witness signature. In Alabama, you're going to need an affidavit notarized by, you're going to have a notary to get your absentee ballot counted. So it's like a poll tax, but I'm sorry, that's just what you're going to have to do. Plus, there's going to be a couple of weeks of counting, so we need more than people volunteering as poll workers for the day. If you're young and healthy, volunteer for the 2 weeks of the mail-in count. And please follow every crazy rule when filling out that mail-in ballot. And of course, let's be ready for the violence that's going to come. And we can't react to the violence with violence. We have to react to the violence with a kind of stern resolve. So thank you very much, Ralph Nader. And those who are listening, please hit the share button on your Facebook page if you're on the Facebook page. If you're listening, go on to Facebook. We've gone to Facebook Live simulcast with the KPFA and affiliates and other radio station affiliates listening to Flashpoints, because we think it's important to get this word across nationally for those people who don't have this broadcast signal. This Facebook Live will be kept up at Greg Palast Investigates. It's not going away, so you can tell people, if you thought this is informative, to go and check it out. And again, hit that share button. This is Greg Palast reporting with Dennis Bernstein, and we're here joined by the legendary and thoughtful Ralph Nader.
I wanted to ask Ralph, Greg, and Ralph, I'd love you to respond to this. We saw this weak-kneed hearing held by the Democrats today, who didn't seem to understand what a real question sounds like. What kind of questions would you go after the phony Postmaster General? What would you want to ask him? What did he need to be confronted on?
Well, first he's got to deliver post office by post office information about where these sorting machines were taken, were they wrecked. If they were, that's destruction of federal property, which is a first-class felony and prosecutable. Because, you know, a few days ago he said, "Oh, we're not going to do it anymore. We'll do our cuts with the Postal Service after the election." That's because he's already done a lot of wreckage in post offices all over the country. Ways that, if you're not knowledgeable about postal operations, have really wrecked the system in terms of meeting standards of time delivery, etc. And people already are, waiting 5, 6, 7 days just for first-class mail to arrive. So that he has to deliver. They should subpoena him. This business of asking. Congress has powerful subpoena power. You defy a subpoena, you can be impeached. Nixon was impeached because he defied one subpoena in the Watergate. Trump has defied over 100 subpoenas by Congress. That is a serious constitutional violation, impeachable offense. That goes right to the core of the Congress information gathering function, which the founding fathers said was critical to all other authorities of the Congress. They have to know. They have to find out. So that's one. You subpoena the information with an immediate due date. Otherwise, you're impeached. Period. The second is you gotta when you cross-examine anybody like this guy, he's under oath. You got to ask him the questions that he's going to lie about, so he can be exposed to a perjury account, which is no small matter for a mega millionaire like DeJoy, who likes the good life and likes to give cash money to politicians like Trump. So you set him up for perjury charges under subpoena. But just sit there asking a question. Each member has 5 minutes, and they spend 4 minutes. DeJoy is just laughing under his breath. And so the other thing is get the labor unions up there. Get the people the small businesses who rely on the Postal Service, and they don't like delayed shipments. Get the people who are not getting their medicines in time. There's a report where people are waiting days to get their medicines, critical medicines for their cancer, for their emphysema, for their high blood pressure. Get them there. In other words, the House has got to come back and go to work. They've been AWOL. What is this? This is a national crisis of multiple dimensions, and they're on their August vacation. They know how to do social distance and all that. They can follow all the rules because they got all the authority and the money to do it, to protect themselves. They should have these hearings in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, on all these issues. Instead, their favorite vacation is not to be disturbed. A House that's AWOL. Now the Senate is beyond the pale. It's, Mitch McConnell controlled, Wall Street controlled, Trump controlled. They're going to go down in history with a stigma that cannot be exaggerated. Their cowardliness, allowing Trump to turn our country into increasingly authoritarian dictatorial regime where the White House seizes the constitutional power of the purse and taxing that Congress only has, the war declaring power only Congress has. He is creating the very monarchical White House that the founding fathers feared the most. They didn't want another King George III. That's why they gave the power to Congress, which doesn't seem to want to use it. So you just, and then you bring the people that DeJoy put in place when they fired the more career high officials of the Postal Service, and you run them through the ringer. That's what you got to do. You got to put in a day's work.
Ralph, we're going to have to leave it right there. That's Ralph Nader. I'm Dennis Bernstein. Ralph, we thank you so much for joining us. The information is crucial. We hope that we can keep this dialogue going. I want to tell people that this discussion is going to continue For those of you who are following it, Facebook Live and other ways, it's going to continue for a few minutes after we say goodbye here on Flashpoint's KPFA Pacifica Radio. My name is Dennis Bernstein. That's Greg Palast. We do this election crimes bulletin
And next Friday.
And Greg is going to be talking to you after the fact, but we have used up all our time on Pacifica Radio, KPFA, flashpoints.net. Check us out. Check Greg out. Stay with us if you're on Facebook. More to come. That's it. Thank you, and thanks, Mike, and all the folks that made this possible. Carrie and the rest, Carrie Harrison. We thank you. Stay tuned.
Very good. And let's make sure that people know that we'll be here next Friday.
That's right. Part 2. But now it's Facebook.
You are now on Facebook.
Okay. For those who are still following us on Facebook, hit your share button. It's very important to get this out to your friends. And this will stay up live. This will stay up, this recording of this, of Ralph Nader, Reverend Yearwood, myself, Greg Palast, with Dennis Bernstein. You'll be able to access this story, which I want you to get out. But right now, hit that share button. And by the way, we'll be here next Friday after the Republican convention at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern on Facebook Live, as well as simulcast on KPFA and Pacific affiliates.
Should we go to your Facebook questions? Some of your fans?
Okay, and you can catch us at Greg Palast Investigates Facebook page. Dennis, what are the questions we have?
I don't know. How about...
I've got one to start off with. This comes from Barbara Friedkin, right off your page. Greg, I've got a map that shows that every place they pulled the machines, but the sorting machines, were places across the country that voted for Hillary. Coincidence?
Actually, what's a coincidence? I'm surprised that they haven't taken them out before. You have to understand that mail service has deteriorated in low-income neighborhoods even before Trump. You had 4 to 20% of all mass mailings into urban areas, which means lower income, which means people of color. 4 to 20% of the mail does not get delivered. We have this fantasy. If you live in a suburban area and you've been at the same house for 15 years, you always get your mail. So it never occurs to you that some people actually don't get mail. But now, not getting your mail ain't just missing, the junk mail request to donate to Save the Puppies. It's now about saving your nation, because your ballot's supposed to come through the mail. And can I make one suggestion to people? Because I always don't, we talk about all these terrible things going on, but there's one way around it. Please, if you have your ballot and you can put it in a drop box, you could, if the state doesn't have it, in most states you can take it right to the polling station, so you won't have to wait in line. You just bring in your mail-in ballot. And in every state, you can always bring your ballot into the county board of elections, your county office where they deal with elections, sometimes just called the county clerk. But every single state will accept your ballot at the county offices. You can avoid the post office. And of course, you're going to have to use the post office to get your ballot unless you go into your county board of elections if you don't get your ballot within 3 weeks. So I'm trying to give you solutions, not just make this a bitch fest.
And Greg, I just want to add to that, that when we're messing around with the post office, it is the ballot, and it's a life and death thing if you have to go out and vote and you're really at risk. But it's also a life and death thing for hundreds of thousands, millions of people who are depending on, for instance, like me, for life and death medications that we need to have or we will be at risk. So this decision to crush the post office is deadly on a number of levels. We can take another question if we got one.
Yes, we do have, what about the serious possibility, this is from Kevin Koster, serious possibility of a government shutdown starting on October 1, since the Senate is unlikely to approve any stimulus or much government funding. So how are we going to run this election, especially mail-in election, if we're in the middle of a government shutdown? So we have even fewer people for an election that will require many more people than normal. Wow, that's a damn good question. I wish I had an answer. Except I guess the answer will have to be, if the government isn't there, you're going to have to be there. That's why I say, if you're healthy and younger, please volunteer, not just on election day. Understand this will be a 2-3 week process of counting the votes. California takes at least 2 months. We're an all mail-in state virtually. We take about 2 months to count those mail-in ballots. New York took 7 weeks to count the mail-in ballots. We don't have that time. In addition, there's going to be fights over every ballot because those Boogaloo boys and Roger Stone's Proud Boys are going to be in there challenging ballot after ballot. So we need someone to go in there to challenge the crazy challenges. When they say that Dennis Bernstein's signature doesn't look like his signature, we need someone to say that ain't so, and challenge that. And it's not small. 1.9 million votes were cast and rejected for the count in 2016. 1.9 million votes. And I said the statistics before. It's from How Trump Stole 2020, but I got it from the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. If you're black, it's 900% more likely you're going to have someone challenge your vote and have it rejected than if you're white. So please, be careful when you're filling this out, but we need people there to challenge the challengers, and don't count on the Democratic Party. They weren't there in Michigan when there were ballots being counted, and it gave the state to Trump. I was in New Mexico when Republicans challenged every mail-in ballot, and the Democratic Party was not in the room, only the Green Party. So you're going to have to protect your vote. Don't expect that the Democrats are going to show up with some miraculous lawyers who are going to say, save that guy's vote. That's save that woman's vote. It's your vote you're going to have to save. Go in, volunteer, not just for Election Day, but the 2-3 weeks following.
And do we have another question, Carrie?
Sure. So the next one, it's a complicated, multi-layered question. I'll try to translate it. During the recent Bush regime, a Republican agenda stressed the Postal Service to pay ahead on their employee retirement funds, which unfairly financially stressed them, which was kept quiet. Postal Service would not be having financial troubles. They were doing fine. This was to force them into privatization, henceforth more Republican investments. This tendency needs to be remedied. Please address how we become a more fascist nation, the kind that Trump desires, though he has turned it around to be a democratic creation as usual.
That's quite a mouthful. I will say, you're dead on right. It's not just to fix the election that they're wrecking the post office. The bigger plan is to privatize the post office, which happened all over Europe. You have to understand that in most of the world now, they're selling off the post offices. Now, we have a private postal system called FedEx. How much does it cost you to mail a letter by FedEx? So you're going to get an idea what happens in privatization. Okay, not everyone will get their mail, and you won't be able to afford the stamp. Okay, so yes, there is an agenda that's even beyond stealing this election. It's to privatize the post office and to take away your public services. And if they can take the post office, it's when Margaret Thatcher in England privatized the post office, that was the first step. Then they went after electric companies, water systems. Thatcher called this seizing the commanding heights by privatizing and selling off the most basic government services. If they can sell off the post office, they can sell off anything. They can sell off your government. So thank you for asking that question, because it's the destruction of the post office is way beyond this election. Any other questions?
I think that
We
might
have one. Would it be safer to vote in precincts on voting machines?
Yeah. But I don't want you to die doing it. Okay, so here's a simple suggestion. A lot of organizations, like Reverend Yearwood and the Hip Hop Caucus, if you missed him, They're pushing to have younger people especially vote early. Almost every state has early voting. Let's stop thinking of election day. Don't line up for 4 hours on election day. Think of it as election month. Most states you can vote early. Go in with your mask, go in with your gloves. But if you go in for early voting on a Wednesday or a Thursday afternoon or an early evening, I can tell you, I've been all over this country at early voting stations. They're dead empty. So don't wait for election day. You can actually vote safely without a line, without a lot of people in early voting, especially midweek. I will say there's one exception to voting early that's going to be difficult, is Souls to the Polls Sunday. That's the Sunday before Election Day, when African American churches traditionally take the people who don't have their own cars, they vote as a group. Unfortunately, the GOP has learned that Souls to the Polls Sunday, African American voters, is Democratic Souls to the Polls Sunday, and they're going to do everything to block it. I saw horrible stuff going on in Ohio when they cut the number of polling stations to 1 for early voting in each county, 1 for Cleveland, 7-hour wait, 1 for Dayton, 5-hour wait, 1 station in Louisville, how many hours waiting there? Now as polling stations are crushed down, gigantic waits on Election Day, gigantic waits on Souls to the Polls Sunday, so go in beforehand if you possibly can. If you otherwise do mail in your ballot, but try to avoid the post office, take it to the drop boxes, take it to the voting centers, take it to your county board of elections. Much safer than going to the polls, or even worse, sticking it in a mailbox and, praying that a Jim Crow alligator ain't in there.
Greg Palast, here's another question. This one comes from David Littleboy. How are we going to see the DMV closed to thwart the motor voter law?
Well, yeah, that's a big problem. Look, the GOP is very good at this. And while I'm picking on the GOP, as of course I have mentioned Democratic schemes that to suppress the vote, but that always happens in primaries. Democrats go after primaries. But so what's going to happen with DMVs? Do you know that in 2013, when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, the next day, the state of Alabama shut down almost every DMV in what's called the Black Belt counties. That is the black majority counties of Alabama. They simply closed the DMVs, so you couldn't get your license, but their whole point was to stop you from registering to vote. And the timing was obvious because of the day after they gutted the Voting Rights Act. So, yes, do they deliberately close DMVs to stop you from voting? I saw it in Alabama. This is not theoretical. This actually happens. And right now they know for damn sure that, DMVs are limited. People aren't going in, or they're closed because of the virus. Registrations through DMVs are way down. It's very, very dangerous. This year because of social distancing, we don't have the big registration drives. And we don't have the DMVs open, and people aren't going to the DMVs. So it's really important that everyone listening get everyone they know to check their registration, make sure they're still registered. And if you know someone who's not registered, for God's sake, tell them to go online to register. And if you did, by the way, register to DMV, you ready for this? About 40%, Dennis, of registration forms filled out at DMVs don't get entered onto the voter rolls. And again, I was talking to the Secretary of State of California. They said this is a racial problem because the people that they're not including are people that the clerks have trouble with because they've got an accent or a hyphen in their name, like Garcia Marquez. He probably could never register to vote in America.
Here's one for John and Dennis. Both of you probably should talk a little bit about what can we do to prepare for post-election chicanery.
Dennis?
Suit of armor and go out there and get ready to do battle, because it is going to be an outdoor battle. It is not going to be simply hearings in the Senate room. This is going to be a troubling moment in our history.
One thing I would like people to do, I'm asking people to volunteer for the vote count and the opening of the mail-in ballots, which will not be one night. It will be many, many days. But expect Boogaloo Boys, Proud Boys, and any other Roger Stone nudniks to use violence to try to shut down the count. I'm going to need people to be courageous in the face of these crazy people who are threatening, because they're mostly loud, noisy, berserker bullies. They normally, I can't guarantee it, but normally they don't actually hurt people because they might be hurt back. And like most bullies, they're cowards. So we got to have people who don't stop counting the vote, no matter who's banging on the window or throwing rocks through the window or, God forbid, Molotov cocktails through the window. You keep counting that vote. And in Florida, that was the great tragedy, is the people counting the vote were afraid of Roger Stone and his crazy screaming and hollering and banging on the windows. That literally gave us George W. Bush and the war in Iraq. Count the votes. And you're going to have to do it through the tear gas smoke, the Molotov cocktails, through the shouting and screaming. No matter what, count the vote.
All right.
This next one comes from Los Angeles. Is it better to register to vote online?
Yes. Okay. There's a lot of fear of voting online. We don't have that in America yet, and it's a good thing, because we don't have the technical ability to keep your vote secure. But registering online is a completely different thing, because you can take a screenshot of it, you can get an email confirmation, and it beats the hell out of filling out one of those yellow forms. As I say, 40% of those forms never get entered on the voter rolls. But if you register online, and you can do that at every single board of elections, county board of elections for wherever you are in your county, you can register right online. And also, because it's so easy to make a mistake on these registration forms, which will disqualify your registration, it'll tell you online, no, you missed a line. By the way, I did. I looked online for Greg Palast. It was actually during a Flashpoints show with Dennis Bernstein. I looked it up to show people how to do it, and it said, no such voter. This is in California. So I registered online, I saved my vote, and I did vote in the primary. And again, you're listening to a special simulcast. This is the additional special bonus time on Facebook with Dennis Bernstein, Flashpoints, and next Friday we will be back for a special follow-up after the Republican convention, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Please tell everyone you know, and right now share this. And remember, you can always go back to Greg Palast Investigates Facebook page, the KPFA Facebook page, and you will be able to watch this program with Dennis Bernstein, Greg Palast, and really important, Ralph Nader, and Reverend Lennox Yearwood, the founder of the Hip Hop Caucus.
Here's a question that comes literally from safely 6 feet away from you, Greg, from me. Is there a snowball's chance in hell Donald Trump can be defeated, given all that we know?
Well, I just want I don't care about whether Donald Trump is defeated. I'm actually quite nonpartisan. My concern is that the voters aren't defeated. My problem with Trump, and the reason my book is called How Trump Stole 2020, is I don't like the theft of your vote. I think America should try something brand new, which is letting the voters decide who should be president. Now, one way to overcome the steal, as I say in the book, they can't steal all the votes all the time, Carrie. So what happens is, if you overwhelm the steal, don't cry that you can't win with 51%. When I was working with Rolling Stone, my co-author was able to contact Barack Obama. And I said, we showed him how he lost 5.9 million votes. He was very familiar. He knows all the vote suppression tricks. I know he didn't talk a lot about it when he was president. But he said something simple. I just overwhelmed the steal. Now, I would like to say we could clean up our system and have real democracy in America instead of this mockery of democracy. But that ain't happening right now. So don't steal your own vote by not voting. Do protect your vote by all the steps you're taking, and make sure everyone's vote counts. And if the people decide, I think that there'll be a regime change here. But we've got to take steps. I was just reading, right now Joe Biden is ahead of Donald Trump in the polls in Wisconsin by 6.5%. That's a safe margin. Well, guess what? Hillary Clinton, ironically, was ahead of Donald Trump in 2016 by the same exact 6.5% of the vote, according to the polls on the morning of the election. But they were able to disqualify and block enough voters to overcome that margin. So that's your target. You got to get 7%. We're going to need about 10 million extra voters to come out and make their choice. Okay, so now I think we're heading towards the wrap-up of this Facebook Live tonight. It's been terrific with the Reverend Lennox Yearwood. We've got Ralph Nader on. We're keeping this up, and we'll be here next Friday as well. And at that point, you can listen to us on KPFA and Pacifica affiliates. But very important, you can watch us at Facebook Live, the KPFA Facebook page, Greg Palast Investigates Facebook page. Please tell your friends to join us next Friday, and we'll take your questions too.
Beautiful. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dennis Bernstein.